Hey everyone. Hey Jeff, can you hear me? Hey Jeff, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All right, let's see here. Let's get this. Need to get it up to about there. There, that's a little better. Move that down a bit. Hey everyone. I don't know. I've got we've got someone else who's joined as well. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yes, this is the new time. So we're going to be doing this live stream every Tuesday at 6:30 until whenever we finish. And so this is going to be, my setup. You'll see pictures and stuff going up as I complete the new time room in the new office, which is nice. Better studio lighting for this, and of course, we'll probably have some guest hires join us every week or so, or every other week, as we continue to do this series for as long as we need to. So I need to get a hook, but for those who joined us, what we're doing today is a deer hair frog, or more specifically a Dahlberg Diver. And we're going to try to demystify tying with deer hair. And specifically parts about deer hair that you want to try to achieve, and then parts that you think you may want to achieve, but you actually don't. We'll get into that. So let me grab a hook real quick, as well as I got my bag of deer hair here that I can play with, and also make sure that I can see for those of you who aren't able to put on. Oh, I see that actually. Stu, hey John. I see you're on, and again, you guys can hit me up over text, and I'll try to, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to shoot them through, and I can repeat them for others that may be watching the live stream. So give me 1 second. Cool, got a hook. Sorry about that. Yeah, I got a comment on my haircut. I'm calling it the quarantine. Literally, it was, hey, I need a haircut, and I don't care if it looks terrible. Let's just put a shaver to the head and make it work. So we'll see how that grows out, and whether or not I'm just going to have to completely shave if it comes out horrible. So first thing that I'm going to do before I put my hook in is debarb it, right? And I'm just using my debarb pliers, but you can use any old pliers for this, or another cool trick is using the flat part in the scissors. So you could actually bring that in here too, and that gives you enough leverage where you can actually take the hook out. One reason why I'm not doing it in the vise, however, I see a lot of people will put the hook in the vise and they'll crush the barb in there. You can actually damage the internal mechanisms of your vise doing that. So I highly suggest not making that a habit or a practice. All right, so let me put the hook in. I recently tied on this size hook, so I don't actually have to adjust it too much. So hook tension. When I'm doing hook tension in my vise, and let me adjust this down so it's not in my way. This is I'll show you guys. This is a really nice little garbage bag. When you're tying with deer hair, you will learn how much of a mess it is, something like that becomes really handy. And when I go to actually do the shaving, you'll see where I move that over. So let's talk about hook tension. For a lot of our flies, if the hook moves a little bit, it's really not that big of a deal. When we are doing a deer hair fly, however, we want good tension on our hook. As best of a tension as the vise that you're tying with can provide. And it's okay. Well, I'll show you as I tie how I hold. So if this slips a little bit, it's not the end of the world, but you can hear that sing. I know that's nice and taut on there and not likely to loosen up on me. So let's get into thread. Now in this bobbin, I actually have some Gel Spun thread. You can see that here, right? So GSP, this is size 200. I like size 200 because it gives me some error room. So you'll see Gel Spun at 100. I think I've seen it at 50, but don't quote me on that. That's a thinner diameter. It's great. It's fine, especially if you're going to tie smaller flies where you need the tension. However, the thinner this diameter is, when you go to apply to actually get this hair to flare, you will run the risk of cutting through that hair. And if you cut through the hair, then, well, you unwind and you're going to do it again. So the 200 size, if you're going to invest in, is just thicker, where I find that doesn't happen as often. So that's why I will use that size. But I have a second bobbin loaded up as well. And this has got, this is a 140 and a UTC 140. And the reason why I have this is because we're going to first tie on the tail end, right? The actual hackle and a little bit of flash material. And I don't want to use my Gel Spun up for that. You can. It's obviously a thicker thread, so you're going to have a lot more of a thread bump. Not the end of the world, but this stuff's also a little bit more expensive, so I want to conserve it for when I'm actually tying with the hair. So I'm going to go on with D2C first. So when I'm tying the deer hair flies, I am actually going to try to leave this hook shank as bare as possible, so that I'm spinning or not spinning, but in this case we're going to do hair stacking, and I'll show you the difference on a bare metal hook. That's my preference. Some people actually prefer to have a thread base down in order to have more stuff for that hair to grab onto. Do whatever works for you. This is just my preference. I find I can stack the hair tighter if I can slide it along the hook shank. And then of course, some people like having where if they use Superglue during this, and I'll show you where you would do that, having a thread base down can also give it more to bind to. So to not have a hook or a thread base all the way down the hook, I'm actually going to start back here, back by the point of the hook. And that's where I'm going to put my thread on. So rather than starting up front and working my way all the way back, I'm actually starting right back here. So just put a couple of wraps on, trim off the tag end of my thread, and now I'm at my tie-in point. So this is a Gamakatsu B10S size 2/0. I like tying with bigger hooks for my deer hair flies. I like the B10S because it gives me a wide gap, right? So you can see on this fly here, there's enough of a gap so that if a large predator were to hit this, it would be able to set the hook. You can tie on pretty much any streamer hook. Feel free to make it work for you. But I find that wide gap hooks will give you a better hookup ratio, or at least a better chance. So that's why I tie on the B10S or really any wide gap streamer hook, and there's a ton of them out there. All right, so the next step that I want to do is I want to tie the flash. And I like a stiffer flash for this. So for this, I'm going to use a Krinkle flash, and I want to use one that's going to show up a little bit better. So I'm going to tie in this gold. This, by the way, this was not very expensive. This stuff, I got it on Amazon, and I got like 15 of them. It was like $1 per pack, and it works great. So finding materials right now I know can be a little bit difficult, but don't be afraid for certain things like flash just to to experiment, take a gamble, and then it can work out quite well. So I'm grabbing, what is this? 1, 2, 3, about 5 strands. Not a ton, but enough where I'll have enough sparkle at the end to hopefully catch the attention of a predator. And so when I work with flash, and I work with crinkle flash specifically, because it's even more unruly, I will trim up to, most of them come with a zip tie. I don't try to pull it out, because if I were to go to pull these strands completely out to get the full strand, one, it'll start messing with this natural, you can kind of see how the light sparkles off of it in this weird dotted pattern. So this is crinkle flash. It's actually crinkled together. If you pull that too hard, you'll actually unwind it, and the flash won't look as good. But more importantly, you'll start loosening this tension that everything's under, and this material will start falling out. So I just cut up to the zip tie and leave the rest inside of there, and it leaves minimal waste and makes it so that that stuff is less unruly over time. So to tie in this flash, and I know that I'm not going to have super long legs, I'm actually going to fold it over. So I'm going to take my thread, work it back up to my hook point. So I've got this thread base down, fold over top. So I've actually trapped it. And then the cool thing when you do that is you can actually lay it right on top, and under tension, it'll put it right into place. So then this stuff doesn't fly everywhere. And then just a single wrap of thread back. And this now is so well trapped, this will never come loose. And that's a really good way to make sure that your flash stays in place. I'm going to go ahead and trim this. Usually, I will wait to trim flash on flies like deceivers and things like that until after I have the tail in. But I know my tail is going to be longer than this, so I'm just going to trim it even. And I'm doing a little bit more than a hook shank length, if you can see that. Just so that there's a little bit of flash, but it's closer to the body. And there's a reason why I'm doing that too. So when we look at this fly, and we're looking at it, how the fish would see it in the water, right? What I'm trying to do is present as much of a profile, a solid profile as I can. So I have the legs that are going to kick in the water, and then I have this kind of bushy material here kind of showing a little bit more of like the thicker legs, right? You can really see that kind of frog leg look. And this flashing here is going to help attract that fish, but I don't want it to be super crazy long. Because if it's real long and it's real wishy-washy, it doesn't look natural. So this looks, especially as it gets wet and this material comes down, it just makes it look like a thicker thigh. And then, of course, we have the solid body up here from, the frog body itself. So that's why we're keeping this relatively short. So the next thing I want to do is I want to prepare to put on my hackle for my legs. But right now, if I look at my hook shank, everything is nice and thin, which is fantastic, except I want my legs to kick out. Because I want it that as I strip this through the water and I pause, these legs will actually kick as it goes through and look more natural. So to achieve this, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to tie these feathers in along their natural curve. And two, we are going to create, and I'll show you after I do it, a ramp to put these legs against. So I'm just going to work my thread forward a little bit, then work it back, and then start tying in what we'd consider to be a thread bump. So if you're familiar with how I tie in dumbbell eyes, I'm always creating this thread bump in the back, or actually up in the front. This time I'm doing it in the back. And that's going to give us material for our legs to kick out against. So turn this now. And this is even in this better lighting. There, you can see it a little bit. A little bit of that thread bump has started. But I want to accentuate that bump and provide a flat spot to tie these legs on, right? Because hackle can drive people crazy. And when I first started tying, it absolutely drove me nuts, where it would want to roll on me. I'm going to show you how you can get this where it's nice and flat and gives you that profile that you're looking for. And this is great for deceivers, for our, the frogs, and really anything that has a hackle tail. So right now, I have a round thread dam around my hook shank. So if you have a pair of debarb pliers, you can actually come in and start flattening this out. If you don't have the debarb pliers, if you have a pair of scissors like this that have that flat section, you can kind of see it. You can also use those. I'm going to pull my bobbin out of the way. You can come in and start flattening with this. Just be careful when you do this not to flatten this bump, but to create a ramp. So you can come in at, so I'm coming in at this weird angle. And that will also help create this flat ramp. And I'm going to use the debarb pliers because it's my preference. All right, so let's show you what that's resulted in. So here we can see a little bit more of a triangle look. And then it's hard to see on camera, but this is a flatter section. So, and if you've done this, if you're tying along with me or you tie afterwards, you'll actually see that we now have this really nice spot for our hackle feathers to lay against. So now we need to select feathers. I'm going to tie with 2 feathers, and I'm going to try to have them as close to the same length as possible. So if you have just a neck, like I'm using here, the way that I will find feathers is I will actually bend along the hide or skin. It separates out the feathers and allows me to look in and find the shape that I want. And I see 2 right here that look pretty good. So pluck those off. And I can see that when I hold them together, they're almost look like one feather, right? And I selected ones that have a natural curve to them. So the idea is to tie these in where their natural curve is against one another. That's going to help with the legs kicking as well. So now the next part is I need to tie these on. But again, I've got a semi-flat surface now where I've created with my thread, and I've got a round stem. Well, if I go to tie that on, it's going to want to roll on me. So I want to make this flat. So I have flat on flat, and that is going to make our legs sit exactly as we want and flare it out the way that we want. So to achieve this, I'm going to grab my scissors again. I'm looking in this part of the stem. So as we get farther down the feather, our stem gets thinner and it gets less and less hollow. Versus up here, this is much more, just one second. This is more hollow and will actually flatten out if we go to crush it. So I want to tie as close to the end of this stem as I can, while still being a decent part of the hackle feather. So I don't want to be in the webby stuff. I want to tie right about there. So I'm going to come in, cut that off. The next thing I want to do is prepare my feather to be able to be tied. So that's where we actually come in. And we create this comb effect. Hard to see on the webcam. Let's see. How close can I get? Not that close. Back up, back up, back up. All right. I didn't tie directly across. I didn't strip these off. So there's a little bit of kind of barb material, and that's going to allow my thread to grab against it, which will greatly help with the durability. So the next thing I need to do is turn this round stem into a flat stem. So again, I can use my debarb pliers, or I can use my scissors that have the flat bit. I'll show that because I know most people don't have the debarbs. And you're going to come in and very carefully just crush it. If you do this too hard, you'll actually break or kink this end. So let me trim this other feather, the second feather, and I'll show you. Hopefully it'll show up and you'll be able to see the difference. So when I go to trim the second one, I'm going to lay the first against, and then trim them to be the same length. I usually actually trim my feathers together. I don't do them one at a time. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm just trimming so that my barb section is the same length as well. Let me trim this just a little bit better. All right. So we have 2 feathers prepared. This top one has been flattened and the bottom one hasn't. Hopefully you can see how this now has a broader stem than the one on the bottom. And that's what, so I'm going to crush this one as well. And that's what's going to give us the ability to tie this in and have it tied very securely, but also in the orientation of not have it roll on this. I'm going to use my debarb pliers for this because I actually prefer these for this job. This is a great tip for deceivers as well. So now I'm actually ready to go ahead and lay these in. The last thing that I'll do is I will take, because I have it, super glue. It's not required, but I will put a drop of super glue and spread it just a very thin amount on that that thread dam before I put my feather on, which is going to further help lock these in so that these are just not going to be easy for a fish to pull out. So I'm going to lay this up against, and I'll show you this one next. Be very careful here. I'm looking for the natural curve to curve away so that it kicks out. So easy to do this backwards. And if you do, it's not the end of the world. And I'm going to trap the very tip in first. So that's in place. But I haven't moved my thread back, and I'm not going to yet. Why? Because I still have this flat spot. So if I were to wrap back and just tie one leg in, or one hackle feather, one leg in, I turn this flat into a round, and then it'll roll on me. So I've just put enough thread wraps on the very tip to hold this in place to allow me to go ahead and put the second feather in. And I'll show you this because I'll actually tie it so that you can see. So I'm going to put just a very thin amount of super glue on. And I use the gel type super glue, so it gives me plenty of time to do this without having to worry about it drying right away. Hold this feather up against, and then come in, and this is doing this backwards, so it's not easy to do. Let me tighten my thread up so that I have more control. And I'm just putting couple wraps in the very front, and I can adjust now if I need to get these to be the right orientation. See how these are kicking out? That looks great. So I've got lots of tension without breaking my thread up here, and now I'll kind of walk backwards, but not under the same amount of tension, just enough to pin these legs against my thread and against that super glue without too much tension where I would cause the feathers again to roll. Now I have come back. I picked the wrong thread color for this. So I have come back to the point where I'm not all the way back to where my crinkle flash was. I'm where my thread dam is about its widest. Because if I go too far back, I'm going to fall on the other side of it and I'm going to crush these together, and I don't want to do that. So now I'm going to just go ahead and bring my thread back forward and finish out right in front. And now I'm ready to tie off and cut off this smaller thread. So the back half of this fly is now complete. So if you want, you can whip finish back here, or you can put in a series of half hitches. And I'm going to do the latter. I'm actually going to use a tool that I'm going to show and introduce here in just a minute. I'm just going to use it to put in a series of half hitches. When I put in a series of half hitches, so I'll show you again, I came down on top, went over, put it into place, pull it tight. But I will also come underneath and up and put a half hitch on that way. So that puts the half hitches on in reverse. That gives me a locked knot. So I'm going to do that one more time. I came over top. This time I'm going to come underneath. And that's plenty to ensure that this is going to hold tight. So I'm going to pull under tension to lock in those knots. And then I'm going to go ahead and come in and trim my thread. So I'm not going to do it now, but when I'm tying, these to go into my box, I'll actually take maybe some head cement or something like that and put it on these thread wraps as well to further soak in and further lock in these legs. I'm not going to do that for time tonight. So I want to go ahead and start showing you how to just actually stack the hair. But you can see here, my legs kicked out. They're straight, right, in orientation with that hook shank. And they're locked in. They're very secure. You would have to break these before you're going to pull these out. And that's what we had wanted to achieve with those. So we spent some time going through that, but I think that's a really important part of this fly. If you have the front of this fly looking great, but the back half doesn't look natural, well, it's not going to give you that swimming frog with the kicking action. And I think that's just as much this point. Yeah, Jeff says at this point you have a bluefish fly, and he's right. Bluefish love to go after the tails. You could literally just throw this and they will go nuts. It looks plenty like a bait fish for them. This is close to a tarpon pattern too, although they don't tend to have the legs kick. If I put these together, then I would have tied it what they call keys style, and I would finish it off back here on the back end of the hook shank, and you could actually use it for tarpon. So learning how to lock feathers in like that gives you a multitude of different patterns to tie off of. So I'm going to switch over now to my gel spun thread. I know the two colors are very close, so it may not seem it, but yeah. So I'm now on gel spun, and I'm going to lock this thread in right onto the same point. You know what I could do? Since I'm not going to do, I still want this to be durable, put a very thin bead of super glue right over the top. So when I wrap my gel spun in, it's actually going to lock that in place. And I'm just going to wrap this back up. It's right about there. I thought that's a good spot, right before where I tied in my legs. I'm going to take my scissors and cut this. You will learn how sharp your scissors are once you start tying with gel spun. It is difficult to cut. Kevlar is the same way. Kevlar, gel spun, you can use either. Let's put another couple of wraps just to cover up that tag end. So I have my thread right here, not back here, but just up above it a little bit. And that's where I'm going to tie in the first bundle of hair. And the reason why I'm tying up here versus back here is I don't want to crush these legs. I want to protect these as much as I can to make sure that it still has the ability to kick. So I'm ready to grab some deer hair. And let's tie this in a fun color tonight. I know I did green legs in the back. I could do green in the front, make it look real natural, or I could go crazy and tie an orange. And I think I'm going to tie an orange. Let's have some orange here. And I want to pick a good top color too. So let's go nuts tonight. Let's, you know what? Let's do orange and black. I actually really like this combo. Nice bright belly, darker top. But you can do whatever color combo that you want. I'm just going to open these bags up so that this is out. I'll show you, again, this fly. This is a much more of a natural color. So this bottom was tied in it was like a tan. And the banding that you see is just the difference between the butt end and then the tip end of the deer belly hair. So it gave me natural banding as I tied this in place. And then on top, I used like a frog green, like an olive actually, and then a little bit of white and black. And I'll show you how to put that type of design into your fly. So first thing that we need to do is tie in our bottom hair. I always tie the belly first, and then I'll put on the top color second. And the most important thing of tying with orange and gray would be a good one, actually. Hang on. I might have, nope, I'm out of gray. So I can't do that one. Sorry, Jeff. But, you know, we're going to do orange and black. It'll be close enough. All right. So when I go to grab this material, you want to try to grab as much of it as you can that you can actually. Yeah. So Jeff asked, I'm not spinning my hair. I'm stacking it instead. Yes, I'm going to stack this in place. I will show you what spinning looks like. Then I'm going to undo it, and then I'll stack it. And the reason why we're stacking is, one, it allows us to control over our colors so that we can do this kind of two-tone really neat. And two, stacking is the way that you get your hair dense. So this is, like, I can actually press on this. This is very dense up here. You want to be careful. You can actually be too dense. And I'll show you when I'm putting tension. You don't want to go too crazy. You want this a little looser. And the reason why is if this isn't super dense, it's going to allow it to actually dive under the water. So this is supposed to be, if my hook here is the water, as I strip this, it's supposed to go down and then come back up and act like a swimming frog. If this is super, super dense, it's just going to skip along the top. So you can actually see these, you know, some people time where they're so tight, it's almost like a cork popper. And at that point, I think you lose a lot of action. So it is fine not to have this crazy, crazy dense. You can see in the back here, there's plenty of play and give to allow water saturation, to allow this to sink a little bit. But if I spin it, I'm just never going to get the density that I want to be able to capture that water to have it dive down. All right. So I'm going to grab a bundle of hair, pull it. So I'm using my thumb to trap it, pull it as far away from the hide as I can while keeping it trapped. And then I'm going to come in with my scissors and cut as close to the hide as I can. So I don't want to show this every time just because it'll take too long. But that's what I'm doing every time I'm cutting the hair off. Then I've shifted my hands down to the butt ends. So I've literally practiced doing this so that I don't have my hair go everywhere. And I have a comb here to help me to pull out all the little hair and fuzzy bits and what have you. You don't need this tool. If you don't have one, you can see I can grab it with my hands, or I can come in and flick it, and of course now there's hair everywhere. But I prefer to have a tool like this because it makes this so much easier. And I'm using my little garbage thing to put everything right into it so it doesn't make too much of a mess. So once you have that kind of under fur pulled out, that's going to allow it to, by the way, flare more. That's why we pull it out. We're now ready to put this on the hook. For the back, I will leave the tips in place. So for this, there's a couple different ways that you can get this hair to go on the underside. One, I can put it up top and put 2 wraps on and then pull it across. But remember, I put a little bit of super glue up here, although that's actually dried now. I'll show you that technique. If it was still wet, I have to go directly underneath. But since this is dry, I can get away with it. So knowing that I've got the tips off the back, and I'm just trying to flare the butt ends of this, I'm going to come in with my thread. I've pinched my thread with my thumb so that it holds in place. Come over top loosely once, pull a little bit of tension so it starts to flare. Loose a second time, holding my thumb in place and pulling. That entire bundle has now gone underneath. And then very carefully, I'm going to place a third loose wrap over top. So I can actually take my hands off without it going crazy. And then the important part of this is to put your thumb directly on top of that hook shank. Notice I'm also holding up here. Remember I said if you don't have the greatest tension on your vise, this is a way of making sure that when you pull with the tension that's needed to flare this hair, you don't pull the hook out of the vise. So I'm actually supporting the hook. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull down. This is where experience helps. There's no other way to say it. I know how much I can pull this thread without breaking it. And yes, I can break 200 gel spun, and I do it quite often. And hopefully I won't do it on this video, but I might. So now that I've pulled it, that hair has flared out, and it's relatively locked in place. I'm going to bring my bodkin in and just move the hair around the hook shank like I want. I am not putting another wrap around this orange. And the reason why is I don't want to mess with the more wraps you put around, the more likely you are to start trapping hair. So you can see along here, it's pretty even and not trapped with gaps. When I first started tying, I don't have a flyer on. I should have had it so I could show you what that mistake looks like. I did lots of wraps to make sure that this hair was super secure. I didn't realize that just these 2 wraps and that third to spin it was all I needed. And so I ended up with all kinds of gaps down here. So if you're finding that when you first start, just back off in the number of times that you're wrapping. So now I'm ready to put on my top color. I'm going to put on this black. So again, I'm just grabbing a bundle, trying to grab the same amount that I did for the bottom. So we want to try to put as much hair on the bottom as we do on the top. Cutting as close to the height as I can. Transferring my hands to the back so I can pull out the underfur. All right, that's got that bundle. So now I'm ready to reposition my hands a little bit because I'm a little bit farther back than where I want. So now I have my butt ends exposed. Bring that right back on top. Bring my thread around. Trap it with my thumb. See how I can make it loose? It's trapped with the back of my thumb. Bring it carefully down through that underside. Kind of wiggle it as I come through here. Put my second wrap through. Bring it down. And now, with my right hand, I'm going to very carefully come through and put my finger directly underneath of where my tying thread is. And I'm going to put my right thumb right on top. So it's actually pinched. I'm actually going to use 2 fingers. Sorry. I've kind of cradled underneath. I got my thumb on top just to support it as I need to. And I'm pulling down tight. This prevents it from spinning around the hook shank and makes it so that I've got orange on bottom and black on top. And I'm going to do one more thread wrap through this bundle, and see how I'm wiggling back and forth. This is to help prevent trapping in material. And now put my fingers back through, pull it tight. By the way, if you spin this, you should still be able to grab this bundle and twist it as needed. But also notice that my tails are still kicking out because I didn't tie it too far back. So now let's talk about this tool. You can see here, it's just a dowel rod, and I've drilled a hole in the center. And that hole happens to fit just over the hook eye. This actually works for a slightly larger hook as well. So I usually use it for 2 or 3 hook sizes. And what this is going to allow me to do is I'm going to just come in, I'm going to move some hair slightly, spin it a little bit to get some hair out of my way. And it allows me to put pressure inside of this stack. So I'm going to come back here to the back to make sure that this doesn't slide backwards and push this whole bundle together. That allows me now to take my thread, wiggle it through so it's in the front, put 2 or 3 wraps in. And now I can go ahead and put in a half hitch. So I want to be careful. I've got some fibers trapped. So I want to not trap those before I release that half hitch. And I'll put another one in just to have it in place. And as you go through, you take your time. You kind of separate any fibers as you need if you want to make it look real pretty. That's how we're going to achieve our density, though. By using this tool, this allows me to get 360 coverage you know, and supporting back here, I can really make that dense. Now I could push this as I go through as hard as I want, and I can make this thing completely solid. You know, you can see the density that I have on the bottom side and on the top side especially. You can have that so the entire fly looks like that, but then it's just a cork popper. So as I go through it, I'm just doing enough so that the material is bunched together. So I forgot to show you what spinning versus stacking looks like. So those of you tying along, don't do this. Let's do this with orange real quick, just a small amount. So you saw that when we stacked our hair, I put a bundle on top, and then I let it stay on top and then held it in place and pulled it tight, right? So if I'm spinning the hair, and I'm going to do just a small amount. I'm going to take my bundle, I would put it on top, and let it go. And now as I pull it tight, it'll give me more of a 360 around that hook. That's spinning. That's great for muddler minnows and great for regular poppers, but it just won't give you the density, and then you won't be able to get horizontal color differences. What I mean by horizontal, right? Orange on bottom, black on top. So I'm going to do those thread wraps that I just put in. You can do vertical banding, so I could put orange, black, orange, black, orange, black, spin it all the way up through. And that's an easy way to make a popper. That's a great popper too. I actually carry flies like that, but not what I'm looking to do tonight. All right. Don't worry that it looks like a mess. As we put more in, it will shape this body more and more. So grab my orange. And Stu, John, I know that you guys aren't on the live chat. Just want to make sure that you guys are okay. If you didn't have any questions or anything like that, if you do, like I said, you can send me a text and let me know. So I'm taking a nice big bundle of orange off, getting it so that I clean out all of these trapped bits. Just combing it out. Now that's clean, we're going to go in here and start tying our next level in. So I want to just make sure that my fingers where the butt ends are exposed. But also I'm exposing these tips. Now you do not, this is not mandatory, this is optional, but I will actually go in and trim out these tips because I can hold this smaller bundle. If you're just starting out, that might be really difficult. Don't worry, it won't hurt the fly if you wait to trim later on. So I've got a rotary vise. I'm going to flip my vise over, and because I prefer to always tie in this way. So last time I showed you, I put the orange on top, 2 wraps, flipped it over. You can do that all the way through. I don't like doing that. I like using a rotary. So I will actually put this deer hair on. You notice I'm putting it on at a bit of an angle. And it's not all the way back where I'm actually going to tie it in. I'm going to leverage the space that I have on this hook shank. And I'm going to push it back afterwards. So I'm doing my 2 wraps. And you can see that they're, you know, about halfway up that hair. And I'm going to switch over to where I'm cradling underneath with my 2 fingers, but letting go enough on the top that this hair is allowed to flare. And so if I do this right, oh yeah, I picked the wrong color, right? Because I've got that black and it goes right into my shirt. Sorry guys. This is the orange is on top, or right now it's actually on the underside. So if I were to flip this fly over, that's a little bit easier, right? See it against my face. Orange is on the bottom, black is on the top. That's what stacking is, gives you the ability to do. So I'm going to put one more thread wrap in just over top. And you can see here, well, you may not be able to, I've actually started to trap in some of these black fibers. So I can just come in and pop those out. Come back, put my thumb on top, give a nice tight pull, and that puts it in. So I'm going to put another round of black on top as well. So again, grab a good bundle. If you can't grab as much hair as I'm grabbing, by the way, I'm not grabbing as much as I'd like to. As you tie more, you get used to using more and more material. You can do this in as small sections as you need to. You play around with it. You find out what amount of hair is comfortable for you. That some people are able to grab just massive clumps of hair at once, and I envy them. I just do not have that much material control. But when I started, I could only handle maybe half of this. So over time, I've just gotten more comfortable. So I'm just cleaning out these butt ends. I'm actually holding this where I want to take my scissors in, trim off those tips a little bit just to make it easier as I'm going through and tying this in. Place it right on top very loosely, no tension. Put a wrap through, making sure not to trap too much. Now I need more thread, so I'm going to unwind manually, again, to avoid putting tension on. Come back in, be very cautious of where I'll actually put my tip of my bobbin in through. So now it's loose. Put my 2 fingers underneath, 1 finger on top just to make sure it doesn't come undone. Start putting in tension, pull tight. Now I definitely should not have used, there you go, black on top. Sorry guys, still getting used to this live stream thing. All right, so now we have that color on top. It looks a little bit of a mess, but it actually is in great shape, believe it or not. So we're ready to take our handy dowel rod tool, separate out some hair. I just do this so that I can expose the hook eye. And before I push back, putting my fingers back here, because I can put too much tension and actually slide this whole bundle off the back and completely collapse my legs. And I'm going to push it back. And this is now starting to give me that density. So push that in place, come forward, put in a couple of wraps to lock it in place. I do about 3. And then I'm going to come in and put in just a couple of half hitches, and I usually do about 3. All right, so we're ready to keep moving forward on this fly. So one thing that people will do, and usually you would use like the more thin super glue than this thick gel, is after each series of half hitches, they'll actually put some super glue right up against. And what that'll do is that'll get sucked in by capillary action, just right into the hair. And that'll help lock this in place so it doesn't spin afterwards. So feel free to do that if you want, but I may not, or I may if I remember. I usually do. When I tied this one, I certainly did. Again, because I wanted that to be nice and secure. So I'm going to do 1 more of the orange and black, and then I will show you how to achieve this kind of multicolored look. So I'm going to do this relatively quickly, just to move forward, because I know that we are spent a good bit of time, and we're only halfway up the fly. Let's grab a good clump. I like to use my thumb to really help hold this out so that I can really grab it. Cut it as close as I can. Clean it up. I'll try to do this in relative real time too, not pausing to explain, so you guys can see about how long it takes me to put on each layer. These are time-consuming flies. These are great if you've got nowhere to go and you got lots of time on your hands and you want to learn a new technique. Great fly to do that with. Since a lot of us are in that current position now, it's not a bad thing to play with if you have the deer hair to play with it. All right, I'm gonna flip my fly over, so I'm tying on the underside. winding up, placing it on, not worrying about being too close to the real tying point. I need a little bit more thread than that. And I'm using the bobbin, the very tip of the bobbin, to thread through so I'm not trapping any other fibers other than what I'm about to spin, or stack, sorry. So I've got my 2 threads in place, grabbing this, supporting with my fingers so that when I stack it, it stays on the underside of the hook. And flipping over. And I got a couple. I want to stay up. So I'll push them out of the way. Give it another nice pull. Go back to the black. Try to grab an equal size bundle. Cut this. I did not cut all of it. There we go. All right, so got that combed out. Trim off these tips and put into place. Really careful, kind of wiggle up through so I'm not trapping in a bunch. Push the tip of this bobbin down through that bundle. Only pull as much as I need to be able to come up to the second wrap. Again, kind of wiggling through, clearing down through, coming in, finding the hook eye, placing my fingers underneath, and slow but gradually firmer pulls to get this in place. And I'm going to push down with my thumb a little bit to give some more pressure. And that feels pretty solidly locked in. Pull these tip ends out a bit so I can get my tool in there. Support always on the back and come in place. By the way, I'm twisting a little bit just to align everything together. Nice firm pressure. Wiggle my thread up through. And wrap. 1, 2, 3, and now put in a couple of half hitches. And I'm actually going to adjust my hook because even though I had that in tight, I'm putting enough pressure that even that's starting to break loose a little bit. And if you want to, you can put in a thing of super glue. I'll try to remember that so I can show you when I do it. So that gets sucked in, locked into place. So Stu, you said that you're using elk hair. So look, I like deer belly hair because it usually comes in fun colors to be dyed. But this is hollow hair meant to flare, and it's hollow, so it's going to float as well. And in the belly is usually you use deer belly hair, right? Because it's white and it allows it to color, bring in lots of color. So could you use something like any other part of the deer hair that, as long as it's hollow enough for flaring, or in your case, elk, you can use elk hair. It won't give you the crazy fun kind of frog-like colors. That's fine. But it will still perform the same way. So you're going to have more of a muddy tan color fly, right? But you're going to get the technique down. So if that's all you have right now, fantastic. And fish it. It's going to fish very similar to using deer hair. In fact, sometimes I'll actually use deer hair to tie an elk hair caddis. I'll probably have Jeff yell at me here in a minute and say, no, you're not tying an elk hair caddis. You're tying a deer hair caddis. Technically, he's right. But the hair will function very similar. It won't be exactly the same, right? Because elk hair is functionally slightly different. Yeah, Jeff's saying it tends to be more hollow. So be careful, Stu, with your elk hair or anyone else. If you're using not the deer belly hair, this is tougher. So I'm really cranking on some tension. You can cut right through elk hair more easily. I don't know if that's happened to you yet, Stu, or not, as you're tying along. But feel free to experiment, right? Smaller flies, you may want to use something like elk hair because you're going to be able to get more flaring and things for a smaller fly versus these larger flies. So no, Stu, I think you're fine. I wouldn't worry about that too hard. All right, so I'm going to invert my fly over, get ready for my orange. So what I want to do is show you how you put in these cool little like multicolored sections and what stacking allows you to do. Yeah, Jeff's saying he's cut elk hair with 8/0 normal thread. Yes. Yeah, I've cut elk hair with almost every size thread. I have a tendency to put too much pressure on and either break my thread or cut right through it. I cut through deer hair all the time too. I actually came close on that last time to doing it. I could actually feel the tension getting too high. So it was one of the reasons why I pushed down with my thumb to prevent that. All right, so for this part, to get the multicolored, I'm still going with a solid color on the bottom of the fly. So I'm still going to do a hank or hunk or section of orange. But be mindful of how much hair you're grabbing. Because in order to get these proportions kind of generally correct, that as you push back, see how this is, let me do it in front. See how that's almost in line perfect? That's because I'm putting the same amount of material on the bottom as I am on the top. If I was putting less material here and more material here, it's going to start doing this as I'm pushing in, and I'll have an less dense coverage on the bottom. So remember how much material you're grabbing for the bottom. We need to mimic that for the top, and I'll explain that when we get to that point. So do this. We see me now put like 3 or 4 sections of orange on. So bear with me, just cleaning lots of gunk out. Shifting over so I can cut off those tips. And placing this along the hook shank. Right, so 1 wrap kind of loose, 2 wraps a little bit tighter, but not super tight. Come back in to kind of cradle it, pull it down. All right, and I'm pinching the hook eye with the top, the 2 fingers underneath. Really gives me a good ability to put some tension on, just enough for me to flip it over and kind of put 1 more wrap over top. I've trapped some of these top hair fibers, so I'm going to use my bodkin just to kind of pull those back, come back in with my thumb, and really give myself some good tension underneath. All right, now we're ready for the top. So I'm remembering how much material I put in, and as I go up, I want to so this one I did with 3 colors. So I want to have twice the amount of bottom color as I do the next layer, and you can experiment with that. But in general, and I'm just going to do 2 colors. I'm not going to do 3. In general, that's about the ratio. Although I actually like not having as thick of a band for the second color. So I would do twice the amount on that top one as I do on that band to make it a thinner. And this one I didn't. But you can experiment. So I normally grab about that much. So I'm actually going to pull off about half of that, roughly. Maybe a little more. Grab that. So now I know that I have less than what I've been tying with the orange, which is good because I'm trying to keep my proportions right. Clean off the black. This comb makes short work of it. That's why I like having this tool. If you're only going to tie a few of these, you may not want to invest in that. If you really get into tying deer hair, and I love it, then you may want to. It's up to you. I definitely tied a bunch without using that little comb. It worked just fine. All right, so I'm going to place this on top. Now, this is going to be a little different. So everything up to this point is going to be the same, where I put it on top, kind of push through, and not put in a ton of tension, and then come back up and kind of push through again. I'm going to unwind my bobbin manually, just give myself a little bit more room. Now, this time I'm going to come in, still going underneath, but I'm going to take my thumb, and as I spin this or flare it, keep my thumb on, right? So let me invert. Let me stand up too so you can see this so I don't like break my back. I'm manually flaring this hair out. What this results in is this little, yeah, I should not have used black, guys. All right, there we go. That's a better angle for it. I have now a flat spot on the top. I have a little cradle that has been created. That is where I'm tying the next color in. So rather than pulling so all the hair comes up, the hair is flared forward and back, but mostly splayed out along the side. So now I need a top color. And just for fun, I'm doing this crazy blue. Oh, that looks almost like dark blue. It's a lot lighter than that. The colors are translating weird, I think, over the live stream. So remember before, I usually grab, I'm usually going to be working with about that much hair. And then I went down a bit for the black, right? So I went down to maybe that much hair. So with the blue, I'm going to go even less to where I'm only having maybe this much hair. Grab, pull that away, and go ahead and cut it, and then tie this in like I've been tying everything else, right? So again, I want to clean this out. Get all that under hair so it's going to flare better. Have this is not super long. I am always on the quest to find the longest deer hair I can, just so that I can tie bigger and bigger flies. So this blue is a little bit on the shorter side. And I'm going to put this right on top. So I have this cradle that's been created. This little area. And I'm going to put the blue right into that and very carefully kind of wiggling through and then pushing through the other side. I'm going to trap 1, 2 thread wraps. So you can see how there's 2 thread wraps in there. I have a couple, like an orange piece of hair that I've pulled up through. So I'm actually just going to take my bodkin, pull those fibers out, just because I don't want them trapped in there. That's a preference thing. So now I can come in underneath, right? So I have this blue on top. Let's see if I can do this way. Let's stand up again, just so you see what happens. Putting my thumb inside the fly on the hook eye, right? So I'm on the eye of the hook, 2 fingers underneath. And as I pull it, that flares up into place. So I'm going to sit back down and pull that tight. If you need to, you can push down, but then make sure that you flare it back up again. And grab my tool, push this, again, supporting on the back, pushing this into place. come forward with the thread, put in a couple turns. All right. So we've got not a lot of hook eye left. I have enough for, I mean, I could probably put 2 bundles in there. So maybe I'll do that real quick. And now we have this kind of trapped, and you see how the black is all the way around it? That's what's going to give us that kind of look that you see here. So that's how you do that. That's how you do the multicolored look and kind of really get that really neat little banding and whatnot and spots on it. By the way, when you do that stacking, you can do that anywhere, right? So I've been orienting my stacking for these flies up top. But if I wanted to, I could have done a stacking on the side. So if I wanted to, and I've done this, if I want to do like a fire tiger where I've got striping along the side of it, then rather than putting this bundle on the top, instead I'm putting it all along the side. And then you get these little kind of cat's eye shaped bands throughout it. So feel free to play with that. Once you get this down, you can really have a lot of fun with deer hair. All right, so let's go ahead and push through. Let's do orange and black and see if I get far enough up that I can just finish off this fly, just so you can see what the shaping looks like. So let me grab a good size amount of hair for this one. Move this over. That bundle is a mess. There's all kinds of stuff coming off of it. So you guys have any questions so far? Feel free to reach out. Let me know. I've got Jeff on too. He'll help with most general questions. Want to make sure that this is as interactive for you guys as possible, so you're getting as much out of this as possible. So, wow, for this bundle, this is I grabbed too much. So this is what happens when you grab too much. You end up spending too much time trying to clean your hair. But I'm trying to. Would have been faster just to have done this in 2 stages. All right, that's a massive clump. And so I'm going to wind up, put this in place, come around underneath. As you get closer to the hook eye, this becomes harder. So you have to make sure that you're trapping that hook eye underneath the thread. And I'm going to pull up a little bit before I go underneath, just because I wanted to make sure I was trapped in the eye of that hook. And before I finish, because as you get farther up, it gets harder and harder as you put the tension in. It's more likely that you will pop the bundle off. So now all I'm doing is my pointer finger is on top, and my thumb, I've just got a pinch hold on that hook eye to make sure that material can't come out, can't come loose, and then putting enough tension. I'm putting a ton of tension on to be able to make sure that that's flared in place. All right, that looks pretty good. I was successful on that clump. So now I'm going to do the same thing with black. Grab a fair amount of this as well and put up on top. Clean this bundle. All right. And that's ready. For this one, I actually didn't cut the tips off. A lot of times in the very front of the fly won't, because it gives me more to grab onto to make sure that I'm really capturing this well, and then I'll just trim it off afterwards. So 2 wraps through, very carefully coming into the bundle, trying to find the eye of the hook. I found it. Did that kind of pinch a little bit. But now I'm going to come back in because I got to support it from the underside so it doesn't spin. I'm going to wind up on my thread because I've pulled a good bit through. All right, that feels pretty good. So I have, with my finger, pushed in to make sure that I've got that hook eye exposed enough to be able to come this tool. So if you look at it right now, that hook eye is completely covered. You might be like, eek, there's too much on there. But actually, when I use this nifty tool and push it back, without even tying the thread, that hook eye is, oh, that's hard to see. There you go. Now that full hook eye is in view. I was able to push it back enough to fully expose that hook eye. So I'm going to come wiggle my thread forward, give myself a couple wraps. 1, 2, 3. And then put in a series of half hitches. These I'm going to do the alternative. So I'm going to come down the tool, up with the tool, down with the tool, up with it. And I'll do that one twice. That puts in a series of half hitches and alternating, and really allows that to be locked in place. All right, so now I'm going to put in a clump of super glue to help hold those thread wraps in place. And cut my thread out of there. All right. So we have a mess, right? I've got my hair all over the bench too. I got hair all over me, and I've got this marshmallow of a thing that we're hoping to somehow get transformed into a fly that looks like this. This is where, again, this is all about practice when we get to trimming, but I'm going to show you ways that I trim that you can kind of use. There are reference points naturally built into this fly with the way the hook is, that's going to help you to shape it. But we're ready for shaping. So I'm going to bring this nifty thing around. Yes. My wife does not like certain flies. There are 2 types of flies that she hates when I tie. The Krelex is more hated than any deer hair because the little bits of Krennic get everywhere, and then the deer hair, because it just goes nuts. I usually have to use a little vacuum afterwards and vacuum up to try to get as much of it as possible. But yeah, this is about to make a mess. Don't get into tying these flies if you think it's going to be nice and neat and pretty at the end. All right, so we are going to go ahead and cut this. I'm going to show you. So thinking about this, right? Because you may or may not have razor blades at home. Razor blades make this so easy. So I'm going to do the. I'll show you manually cutting, and it does work. And then I'll use a razor blade to maybe clean it up a little bit too. So I'm going to cut the bottom first. So you always cut the bottom of your fly first. That gives you a really good visual of where that hook is. The other thing is that you notice that my hook has slowly moved just because of the amount of tension. So I want to It's really, really important to make sure that you know where that hook shank is. So I put this back in the rotary function where it's back true level. And I'm going to come in with my scissors. And I'm using long, sharp scissors for this versus a shorter. This just makes this work so much easier. So the first cut I'm going to do, I'll exaggerate, is coming in at an angle. That's going to help start to clear out the hook eye. And I'm going to do this, since I'm using scissors, multiple times. Let me cut forward a bit so you can see, right? So I've started to clear out from the hook eye. Then I'm going to start coming in and start working my way back. By the way, this is a really good trick. You just flick it and so much of that hair comes up. And now that I've got this kind of shaved line right down along the hook, I can come in with my scissors sideways and continue to trim and do the same thing on the other side. Be careful in the back. You don't want to cut too much of this because we want this kind of like, remember how we were talking about how it makes like little thighs? We want to leave some of those butt ends available in the back. And so if I was trimming with just scissors, that's what I would be doing. And just trimming it until I get it pretty close to the hook shank, but without cutting into any of my thread that I used to put the material in, and trying to get it as flat and even as possible. And this works. As you get more into wanting to tie with deer hair, getting a double razor blade makes this so much easier. So if I'm doing this, I will start resting against the hook eye, coming up at an angle. Do this a few times, kind of both directions, just so I know where my hook eye is. Gives me a nice starting point. And now I'm going to come in and push the razor straight back. Being careful not to go too far back. And that actually gives me a really nice even cut. And then I can kind of take the razor and work along the sides as well. And I prefer that because it makes it more even and cuts that well. And the other part that we're wanting to make sure, and it's hard to see on here, we want to make sure that we are getting enough gap on that hook that, you know, we can have coverage for a fish to be able to be set. So that's enough on the bottom for me for right now. Actually, I lied. I'm going to do a little bit more. I want to have a little bit more of a hook gap than what I currently have. So do this real careful. You can go too deep real easy on this and literally cut straight down all of your thread wraps. And once you've done that, congratulations, you're starting over. So just be careful if you use the razor blade. It's harder to do with scissors. Can be done. I may or may not have done it multiple times. So just be careful. All right, so we have the bottom. So now you can really see, right? That's nice. Straight cut back. We'll clean that up a little bit later to make it even more especially in the back to make it more even. So now we need to trim the front. And what we're trying to do is achieve this shape. Let's talk about this shape for a minute. So why is this fly got this really weird kind of mohawky sort of semi-crazy haircut? Well, the reason is that one, we need a downward facing kind of ramp so that when this goes into the water, it's going to dig into the water and dive down. And then this piece here sticking straight up, what this does is it causes agitation. So as the water comes up, it hits this and then forces it up, creates a little mini vacuum, and creates bubbles behind it. That's going to create agitation in the water. It's going to create awesome sounds. You can hear this, like like this fly from 60 feet away, when I go to strip it, I will actually hear it go bloop, 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 bloop through the water. And that's setting vibration, which since our legs are not really kicking, just looking like it, they're not displacing water, we need to mimic, a frog kicking through the water. And so that's what this shape provides us. So to achieve that, we need to cut back, but not cut into all the way back. So we're going to cut part of this and then stop. So just like we did on the bottom, I'm going to go flat up at an angle and come up. I can do this with scissors. I'm going to use the razor blade. And all I'm doing is getting myself a starting point. See, I have this, kind of hard to see. I have this ramp right here. Let me come up a little bit farther. I'll exaggerate that ramp than what I normally do and get some of the side bits out. Okay, so now you can see I have this ramp. Now I'm going to, with a razor blade, curve it. So I'm pressing in, and that allows me to come in, come up that ramp, and then curve back. And I'm going to probably do this multiple times to get the shape I want. Come in again. See how I'm stopping? I'm leaving this little bit up here. And I'm slowly working down until I find the depth I want. So do this. Like that. I'm actually stopping just as a reference point right behind that little blue color I put in place. Be careful. You can go deep enough here that you will cut that section out. Done it multiple times. So just be mindful of how deep that actually is set in place. All right, so now we have this shaped well. We have this shaped fairly well, but we have lots of little beardy, scraggly bits along the side. So how am I going to trim that up? Well, I could use the razor blade, but I've actually found that curved scissors work better. If you don't have curved scissors, I'll use straight ones first. Just use straight ones. And all you're doing is you're just kind of coming in here, kind of cutting off multiple times until you get back to where this this top collar is. So I'm cutting back to that point. And you just keep cutting in small sections, and you can make a curved surface with a straight pair of scissors. So I'm just going to keep trimming, right? I've got a 3-year-old. We've been watching Finding Nemo, so I've got just keep swimming going through my head, so just keep trimming. YouTube's going to kick me off for being obnoxious. I know it. All right. So that's, you can see the difference, right? Nice and curved. But I actually own a pair of curved scissors, and this makes this so much easier. Come in, trim through, make a mess while I'm doing it. Trim right up to that point. Kind of let the curve of the scissors guide me. And there we have it. That's the front. By the way, you can see that as I did this, I had a little bit of black bleed over into the bottom. Not the end of the world. So it just spun on me a little bit there. So I'm just looking to make sure my profile's right. So I'm looking down it. I need to trim that side a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that. And at this point, I'm not using the razor blade. I'm just using the scissors. I've got more control with the scissors than I do with the razor blade. The razor worked really well to get this top, but it is not, I think, as accurate for overall shaping and making sure I get everything even. Coming underneath, looking along here, making sure that this is relatively flat, that it's not concave, like that. Yeah, so it's not like shaped like this, but rather more flat or slightly rounded, which as these hairs flare, that's pretty easy for it to want to go like this underneath. So trimming that through. So now the next thing is I'm examining my collar, right? So I want to make sure that I've got enough up here that it's going to be able to trap water. And this is a little bit thinner. So I'm going to actually come back. I took the time to shape it right to make sure that my shape is good. Because all the way around this fly now, I'm going to take my scissors and just start working my way down. Taking small amounts off at a time. Don't try to go too crazy and do too much at once. I can always cut hair off. I can't put it back on. You can try, but it's not going to work right. So we do this slowly and in sections until we get to the desired shape that we want. And I think I'm going to take one more pass up along this fly, and I'm going to have the front end of this fly where I want it and have it completed. All right, that's looking pretty good. You may have to adjust the front if needed, but yeah, I'm just going to trim a little bit here. That looks pretty good. All right. So now I want to do the collar. And so to do this, I'll show you over here. I'm just going to take the scissors, and again, I'm using my curved scissors. But you can do this with straight. And I'm just cutting it along until I have a nice, even collar. And I'm trying to keep this as tall as I can make it while still making sure that it's solid. If you make it where it's as tall as the tallest fiber, but it's not solid, you're not going to be able to get that vacuum effect that creates those bubbles and the agitation in the water. So you might as well have a shorter collar. I'm 100% blocking you guys, sorry. It's better to have a shorter collar that's more solid than a taller collar that's real thin. So I just want to trim this a little bit more because this is looking about where I want it. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So flick it a little bit. Yeah, that's where I want it. So this back part obviously is still taller. Let me take this off the vise so you can see, but I have this kind of even collar around it. Put it back on the vise. So now I'm ready to start achieving the back kind of slope. And I'm going to switch over to my straight scissors for this. And all I'm doing is coming in at an angle. And I like to start up at the top first and then work my way down the sides. And I don't go all the way to the back. I'm only coming maybe 3/4 of the way back at first. Coming at an angle. Because I want to leave enough hair that's flaring off the back. And I'm just following this natural curve that I've created. And I'm going to come back in to a second cut to cut down a little bit more. So I can always cut hair off, but I can't put it back on. So I don't want to be too overzealous on that first pass. And if you have to do this multiple times to make it look right, that's fine. You know, these flies take a while, so you should, you know, take your time on it. I have this section here. It's a little bit empty. It's because I've trapped some fibers down underneath. So I can use this comb to help tease those back out. Or if I can find it, I can use my bodkin if you don't have one of those combs to really get down in there and pull those fibers back out in place. I'll do the same thing over here just to fix our shape. Because I want to see what's in the back so I know what I really need to trim. And what I'm looking for, I'll use my forehead, there you go. So some of this is still flared out too much, so I need to trim that back slightly. But it's getting very close. And you can see down below, right, I still have some down there. So let me start down below first. So come in with my straight scissors. Kind of keep it straight. Make sure it's maintaining flat, but not coming in at an angle. This allows me to still have some of this orange present to kick off the back. But now, instead of that clump off the back, I have a smoother transition, right? So just got a couple more I want to do. Nice smooth transition off the back. So I want to do the same thing on the front. So I'm going to come in and cut down just a little bit more, just a little farther than what I currently have. Try to get this as even as possible. So another thing that you can do is you can actually take these tips and say, yeah, these are the ones here that I want trapped. Pull those back. That allows you to also come in and trim without fear of accidentally cutting those off. Just kind of hold those in place. Continue to trim. These flies are all about the trimming. The stacking and everything is important to make sure you're getting the density that you want, to make sure that you're getting the colors that you want. But it's in the trimming where this fly comes alive. I mean, literally, the action of this fly comes down to what shape you put into it. So if I, rather than the classic Dahlberg Diver that has this ridge, if I instead cut this completely smooth, it may look more like a beetle, and it wouldn't just dive and pop. It might dive underneath a little bit, but it wouldn't create the same level of agitation. And I've created flies like that on purpose before. You know, that I will use as a topwater bug, and I'll put rubber legs through it to make that look. Versus this, which has my agitation and gives me that louder presence in the water. So the last thing that we want to do, so this fly is done. This is fishable. The last thing that we really do want to do is to strengthen up. So you see how this is very flexible versus this one is not nearly as flexible. And then the bottom of this fly, you may not be able to hear that. You know, that's has a sharper sound. And how I've achieved that is through head cement. Just I love high gloss head cement because it makes it shinier. And I like chasing bass, and bass like shiny things. Just take a glob out, lay it down, paint it on. This also adds to the durability, helps lock all this hair into place so it's less likely to spin on you. Makes it a little bit of a heavier fly, which helps make this sink better. And then again, we want this fly to sink a little bit. In fact, the largest largemouth bass I've ever caught on a fly rod has come off of one of these little deer hair frogs. and I was using intermediate sink line. So by fishing with a sink line, it forces this fly to go deeper. And then when you pause, so you get your sink line where it pulls it down, pause, and it slowly comes back up, right? Let it pause, another sharp pull. So that's a really effective technique. I'm fishing a topwater fly using a sinking line. So you can do that. All right, so now the next part is I want to strengthen this top bit. You can do this with UV glue if you want. That's actually how most people do it. It's how I prefer to do it. Or you can use the head cement. If you use the UV, you just kind of pour it into place and then hit it with the light all at once, versus with the head cement, where you just kind of have to paint it in place. But the head cement works just fine. All this does is help make this top collar less water permeable and presenting a more solid structure. And that's going to cause more water displacement, which is what we want, which causes more vibration in the water and attracts predatory fish like largemouth, smallmouth bass, many saltwater species. You can fish this in the saltwater, for many different things. So clean your bodkin so that you don't have all that buildup and gunk. All right, and that's it. That's the Dahlberg Diver. That's the deer hair frog. So you can see that profile. This is kind of cool coloration. I'm not sure, but it's got weird chartreuse tail and everything. But I wanted you to see just kind of the colors. Although again, I probably shouldn't have done it in the black because it disappears, right? And you can see how you would put in that multicolor. Feel free to experiment. Have fun. These aren't the easiest to tie. This is something that you have to tie several of them in order to get the density. And again, this isn't a super dense fly that I've created because I want it to be able to sink into the water, but dense enough that it will hold shape and trap water. So if it's too loose, you're not going to create this little ramp that pushes it down. If it's too tight, it'll act like a cork and it won't be able to sink because it'll just be too dense and too buoyant. So yeah, I hope you guys learned something. Hope you give it a try, and let me know what you come up with. And if you have any questions, let me know. And for those who didn't watch this live, that are going to watch it after the fact, leave a comment if you have any questions. We'll be monitoring this and try to answer them as soon as we can. So thank you guys. Hope everyone's staying safe, but still able to keep their sanity during all this. And we'll be back. I think we might be back next week. We'll keep doing this as long as we need to, and we'll have some more fun patterns for you. So take care and have a good night.